This is the third and final video for the Blockbusters show this month, and we're going to be looking at the 2013 Steve Carrell vehicle, the Incredible Burt Wonderstone.
Welcome to the amazing world of magic.
Wow.
Everyone loves a magician, and they'll love you too.
Do you want to be my partner? More than anything.
I'm Burt Wonderstone.
And I'm Anton Marvelson.
But of course, you already knew that.
Your ticket sales suck.
What?
You're Rance Holloway. I had your magic kit as a kid.
I'll give you your money back.
What you're feeling right now, that's why you became a magician.
How did you do that?
It's partially deboned.
What you do is not magic.
It's natural for a dying leaf to be frightened by the autumn wind. Your skin makes me cry.
For 12 days, he's held his urine.
What is going through your mind?
I really have to pee, Richard.
If you've watched a lot of comedy movies, especially for like the last 2 or 3 decades, you've probably noticed that comedians have a quite symbiotic relationship. More often than not, if you were on stuff like SNL or Mad TV or Comedy Central or had a series of stand-up specials, usually these people end up starring in a lot of each other's movies and shows. Obviously, you got the Frat Pack, which had Ben Stiller, Jack Black, Luke Wilson, Owen Wilson, Paul Rudd, Will Ferrell was in there too. And then Will Ferrell kind of split off into his own group with Adam McKay, and those are the guys that do like the Anchorman movies. And then you got the Judd Apatow camp, which consists of like the guys from This Is the End. You got Seth Rogen, Jonah Hill, Danny McBride, that kind of clique. And of course you also got the Happy Madison team, which is basically just a bunch of everyone who's been on SNL that's buddies with Adam Sandler, because Adam Sandler was the only one popular enough to get his own movie studio. Then you got Steve Carell, who's kind of an interesting case to me, because Steve Carell, he was part of the Frat Pack, and he would also show up in a lot of these like Will Ferrell movies, like he was obviously an Anchorman, and he was also in Judd Apatow's comedies. You know, obviously he was in 40-Year-Old Virgin, which was pretty good. And then, I mean, the thing that launched Steve Carell to popularity was obviously The Office. Sure, he showed up on a couple of other shows. He was on The Daily Show for a while. He had parts and stuff like Bruce Almighty, and eventually got Evan Almighty, which was a thing. But The Office, I think, really cemented Steve Carell's popularity, because everyone just thought Michael Scott was just such a funny character. And most of the seasons that have Michael Scott as the main central character, I find them very entertaining, and Steve Carell played him with kind of a childlike whimsy where he does the wrong things, but gosh darn it, he has such an optimism to him, you can't help but laugh at his stupidity. It just kind of feels like this movie should have come out when The Office was going on, and it especially should have came out during the height of all these magicians that they're parodying in the movie. Superstar magicians Burt Wonderstone and Anton Marvelson, played by Steve Carell and Steve Buscemi, have reigned as kings of the Las Vegas Strip for years. Their work rakes in millions of dollars, but the biggest illusion yet is their friendship. For now, time and familiarity have bred contempt between them. When a street magician's increasing popularity threatens to knock them off their thrones, Bert and Anton recognize they have to repair their friendship and salvage the act. The movie starts in the 80s, and we see this kid, Albert Winselstein, getting picked on by a group of bullies, and I actually recognize the kid playing the main bully as being Greg Heffley from the live-action Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies.
Were you planning on not being able to breathe?
Yes.
Listen to me, Weinzelstein. Nobody likes you. Nobody will ever like you.
That's pretty sad when Greg Heffley is bullying you. That's really sad. His home life isn't much better. His mom is barely there to see him on his birthday, and instead of making him a birthday cake, she lays out the things for him to make the cake himself. For his birthday, he's given a magic kit, and it has this instructional video with this amazing magician that Bert is just so mystified by that he decides he wants to become a famous magician. In school, he befriends another kid named Anton Marvelson who wants to become his assistant, and he ends up growing up to become his partner, played by Steve Buscemi. And they go from a couple of nobodies to all of a sudden they're like the biggest act in Vegas, and they're playing in front of a very packed house in Bally's.
What you may not know is that Bert and I have been magical friends and partners since we were young boys.
We always knew there was something a little bit different about our friendship.
Their slimeball boss that they work for is played by James Gandolfini, and Unfortunately, no, he doesn't do the Sopranos accent, so yeah, kind of take or leave that. Of course, over time, he becomes a huge superstar, and he treats Anton like shit. He, just kind of runs through women every single night. A lot of them tend to be his magician's assistants, and in this case, they ended up landing on Olivia Wilde, and of course, they established that she has a history with him, so we'll get to that a little bit later. But as of now, he just has this inflated ego, and slowly but surely they're starting to lose the audience because people are just starting to lose interest in him, and they just kind of chat amongst a couple of other washed-up magicians.
Today, I just want to reward you for your excellent service with this $100 bill.
You're just going to turn it into a $1 bill when I take it.
I don't even know where that's coming from. Who would do that? That's mean. A $1 bill is a horrible tip. I'm giving you $100.
Oh my gosh, you got me again.
Yes, I did.
This all comes to a head when James Gandolfini is like, you know what? There's this new hot up-and-comer, and I'm thinking about replacing you guys with him. And it's this Chris Angel, David Blaine type guy, played by Jim Carrey. I remember when this movie was being advertised, all the trailers made it look like, oh, the grand team-up of Jim Carrey and Steve Carrell once again. The thing is, the trailer made it look like that was the whole movie. It made it look like, oh, these old-school illusionist type, Siegfried and Roy style guys versus, this Chris Angel dude. It made it look like that was the entire movie. Jim Carrey is in like a handful of scenes, and he really doesn't add anything to the plot. Granted, Jim Carrey's scenes are funny, but it never really feels like the scenes with Jim Carrey take the plot any step forward, except for maybe his last appearance. Like I said, his scenes are funny because it's just kind of Jim Carrey doing what he usually does with a bunch of goofy physical comedy. In this case, he plays this guy, Stephen Gray, and they really wanted to do a whole spoof on the whole Chris Angel mind freak thing. So they have it that he has a TV show called Stephen Gray, Brain Rapist. And what he does, they're barely even traditional magic acts. They're pretty much just him mutilating himself. He'll do something like, go an entire week without taking a piss, or see if he can hold his eyes open the longest. At one point tries to drill a drill into his head. There's a scene where he dresses up as a piñata and he ate like 150 pounds worth of candy, and then he just gets a bunch of guys to start beating him with sticks until he coughs it all up.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Gray.
Some of the scenes are funny, but it's like the fact that they don't even connect, and the fact that the thing that really bugged me about that was the fact that Steve Carell and Jim Carrey interact like 2 or 3 scenes. Like, they're never in direct rivalry with each other. And that just kind of sucked. It's Bert and Anton decide that they're going to try and keep their jobs by doing some big grandiose trick, which is basically them locking themselves in a glass case for about a week in the hot Nevada sun. And of course, a few hours go by, Bert starts to panic and eventually ends up breaking their harness. So then they end up falling, and Anton ends up having to go to the hospital. And because of this, Bert ends up getting fired. Oh man, Burt Wonderstone was once the most popular magician in the world, living in the Bally's Hotel, and now all of a sudden he has to slum it by living in an apartment with Olivia Wilde. Oh man. I remember when they did a very similar premise, except instead of magicians, they made it kid show hosts. It was called Death to Smoochie.
You better grow eyes in the back of your fucking head, you horned piece of shit, because I'm not gonna sleep until worms are crawling up your foam rubber ass. I'm going on safari, motherfucker. Safari.
Since Olivia Wilde is their most recent assistant, she decides to take pity on him, and she lets Bert stay at her place. And this is where the comedy really starts to feel like a bad sitcom. There's this scene very early on, and this is when it was like, okay, so how dumb is this character supposed to be? Because what they do is they have it that when she first takes him in, she makes this like really expensive meal, but he says, oh, it's not as good as what they have over at the Bally's. And so he takes it, and he's like, watch, I'm going to get the help to take care of this. He puts the meal out on the floor in the hallway, and then he just goes, andale, rapido, and then just walks back in.
Horrible gruel. I imagine this is what prisoners eat. I'll get it. Let me get that.
Thank you. Oh, that's not, okay.
Andale, por favor.
It was at that point I'm like, okay, so how dumb is this character supposed to be? Is he supposed to be like a shut-in level like Howard Hughes? Because that's kind of the vibe that they were trying to give at that point. But it's like, they showed him living outside of the strip. And that brings me to how Steve Carrell actually plays the character all throughout the movie. And really, if you were to look at the script for this kind of feels like every other Will Ferrell movie that was coming out in the early 2000s. Follows that Will Ferrell sports movie format of like, you know, Will Ferrell was the best at what he does, but then some hotshot newcomer comes around, and then he ends up making an ass of himself, and he falls from grace. But then he comes across that girl that ends up lifting him from his bootstraps and says, you can do this. And then at the end of the movie, he unfucks himself and then gets back to where he was at number one. The thing is, Will Ferrell plays like, you know, overly cocky, confident man-child characters, but when he does them right, he does them right. I mean, Ron Burgundy, I think, is easily one of Will Ferrell's best characters, and I think he played that character pretty well. But Steve Carell, I don't know, when he tries to play, like, straight-up egotistical douchebags, he can't do it the same way that Will Ferrell does when he does it right.
Nobody comes to see you anyway. That's why they call it the Incredible Burt and Anton, not the Incredible Burt and the Incredible Anton.
The Incredible applies to both of us!
That is a hateful thing to say!
Whatever! You're welcome to it! Good luck, you incredible asshole!
Maybe he could do it in small doses like he did with Bruce Almighty, because he wasn't the main character, and then when they got to Evan Almighty, they just changed his character dynamic and made it that he's just a really nice, friendly family man who ends up becoming Noah and all that kind of stuff. But this movie, it's like, they make him this overly cocky asshole, and it's like, I couldn't believe him in that role. It's like, I'm sorry, I can't see it. Steve Buscemi is a really good actor, and I thought that he actually did a pretty decent job with his part, even though there are long stretches of time where, you know, he's in hospice and he's taken away. And then they show later what he's doing on the TV and how he went to Cambodia to help some impoverished village. And then that comes back into play later when they eventually get their magic act back together. I mentioned that there's a thing with Olivia Wilde, and it's because they always do this in these kind of movies. Like, again, they do it in, like, a Talladega Nights and movies like that where the female love interest seems smarter than the typical man-child main character, but they have to get together, so they throw in some kind of forced reason as to why they like each other. And in this case, she says that he was the one that inspired her to get into magic, and she always used to have a crush on him when she was younger, and all that kind of thing. So it's like, oh, okay, well, once they admit that kind of thing, it's like, all right, you're not even trying to hide that they're going to get together at the end of this thing. Also, this huge chunk of the movie that involves Bert hanging out at this old folks' home where he meets his inspiration to get into magic, and he's played by Alan Arkin. And Alan Arkin basically, you know, he starts off as this crotchety old man who's like, oh, kid, I gave up the magic game years ago. I'm not gonna get back into that. And then eventually, you know, they work together and he teaches him like the tricks of the trade and helps him rediscover his passion for magic and not just being a, you know, a cocky, overzealous douchebag. And just like Olivia Wilde and Steve Buscemi, Alan Arkin is actually acting. He's actually trying to do something with this character. And it kind of reminded me of, and it's nowhere near as bad as this movie, by the way. I just want to throw this out there. But it's kind of like Don Johnson's performance in Bucky Larson, where it's like, you know, if the movie was from this perspective of like, you know, the old veteran who has to show the rookie the ropes, that probably would have been a little bit more interesting than the story that we got. I just want to reiterate, this movie is nowhere near as bad as Bucky Larson, by the way. Bucky Larson is still one of the biggest pieces of shit I've had to sit through for Blockbuster show. Nowhere near as bad as that. Eventually, they have Burt Wonderstone and Stephen Gray fight at a children's birthday party because they're trying to get gigs as like a birthday magician, and of course they're doing it for you know, their former boss. And this is where they eventually fight it out. And again, this is like one of the 2 or 3 scenes where they're actually in the same like space together and they're actually having a conflict with each other. It's like if the movie had more of that.
I bet I can make them even smaller. And a little less adorable. Oh, my God. Stop it. Stop it. Weasel. Give me the dope. Give me the dope. Give him to me. Ah. Wow. Wonderstone has disappeared. I wonder where he went. Probably where all Wonderstones go eventually. into obscurity.
Blah, blah, blah. After that fails, Burt Wonderstone finally gets his faith in magic restored thanks to Alan Arkin showing him the ropes. Him and Olivia Wilde eventually get together, of course, and he eventually makes amends with Steve Buscemi, and they decide to revamp their careers, and they come up with this new fantastic trick that finally mixes up the act. What happens is fog enters the stage, covers the audience, and the next thing they know, they wake up in the middle of some desert area just outside of Las Vegas. And the reason that they established that Steve Buscemi's character went to Cambodia was so that he could come back for the end of the movie, and he says that he has this special type of weed that he found over there that can just put everyone to sleep. So they basically vaporize it, turn it into this fog that covers the audience, and that's what knocks everybody out. And for some reason, instead of just making this one big sequence, they show the trick without showing us how it happened. You know, they just show it. And then later, during the credits, they have this like thing of them, you know, with gas masks on. Admittedly, it is kind of funny, but yeah, that shows them like putting gas masks on, and then they have like, you know, trucks with big guys carrying people, putting them into the back of these trucks, and then, you know, setting everybody up in the middle of this deserted area. And then it just all of a sudden hit me like, wait a minute, this trick involves them drugging the audience. Pretty sure that's all kinds of illegal. Though I will say, it did get a laugh out of me because at one point they show like they're like, you know, dragging people downstairs and somebody like hits their face, and then you see like they're like applying touch-up on people's faces to cover up the bruises. And it's like, all right, that was stupid physical comedy, but it got me. Overall, it's not a terrible movie. It's just kind of forgettable. Like, the trailer really made it look like it was going to be Steve Carrell versus Jim Carrey as these, like, different types of Vegas street magicians. But it's not really like that. It just really does feel more like a Will Ferrell comedy from the early 2000s. And not a great one. It's just a mediocre one. It's nowhere near as bad as some of Will Ferrell's really bad sports comedies, but it's also not as good as some of his great ones. Everybody did a decent performance in this. I don't think anyone was really a bad actor. I think, you know, Jim Carrey did good physical comedy. Steve Buscemi is always a good actor. Alan Arkin was trying. And Olivia Wilde, even though they just make her the generic love interest near the end, she was actually trying. And Steve Carell, I don't think he did a bad job. It's just I don't see Steve Carell playing these type of characters. Will Ferrell can do these kind of characters, you know, sometimes good, sometimes bad. You know, every so often you get a Ron Burgundy, and then other times you just get Will Ferrell screaming and flailing a bunch. The other thing is, this movie feels like it's just a couple years too late. Like, I remember some people said that about Zoolander. It's like, you know, oh, this came out in 2001. You know, they're joking about, like, male models from, like, the 80s. Like, that they're really late to the party on this one. This movie feels like an even better example of that because, you know, Jim Carrey's character is this big parody of Chris Angel. And in 2013, was Chris Angel still doing stuff? Because, like, was that when... I don't remember him having a TV show at that point. So, it feels like this should have come out a lot sooner. Then part of me started to think, like, so did this movie sit on the shelf for a while? Like, maybe they wrote it at the time when all that was going on, but then it sat on the shelf. It's not a terrible movie at all. It's watchable. It definitely feels more like a TV movie in certain spots. And I think that's the best case scenario. If it's on TV, then watch it. Because it's a PG-13, and honestly, they didn't really have to cut a whole lot from this thing. So just based on the fact that it's not 2 hours long and constantly shoving Google in your face, that automatically makes it better than The Internship. It also doesn't have that bad sequel feel that Zoolander 2 did. The biggest problem is it's just kind of mundane. That's the biggest problem. It's just kind of, you know, Steve Carell's character isn't all that likable, and, you know, everyone else is giving solid performances, but overall it's just like, eh. If you're looking for a great Steve Carell performance, then just watch episodes of The Office or watch 40-Year-Old Virgin. And if you're looking for these kind of movies that's actually good, then yeah, watch some of the early Will Ferrell comedies like Anchorman or Talladega Nights. Because that's pretty much the plot to this thing, to a T, except instead of being an anchorman or a race car driver, he's a magician. So guys, that does it for Blockbusters this month. Tune in next time. We got 2 episodes for next month, and hopefully we're going to mix it up. We're going to try and, you know, stop doing bad comedies for a while. We're going to hopefully look at, I don't know, some like horror movies, maybe some action movies. I've always wanted to talk more about some bad cheesy action movies and bad cheesy horror movies for Blockbusters, because that's usually what ends up on the show anyway. So yeah, hopefully mix things up a bit next time and, you know, take a break from the bad comedies, because especially after 2 hours of the internship, I definitely need to take a break from that kind of shit. So yeah, look forward to that kind of stuff next month. Until then, guys, I'm Adam Sykes of the Blockbuster Show, and we will see you guys in the next video.
I cannot tell you how I plan to escape, other than by using magic. That is the magician's code. Separately, on an unrelated note, if you happen to find a small brass key